I want to thank you, Steve, for what you shared. Beautiful. This is the first time I've ever had the opportunity to be here in the district of Caesarea Philippi. It really does seem to me to be the geographical background for really illuminating so many of the shades of meaning that we find in this key text, if you will, Matthew 16. And, it's significant. And I want to just kind of highlight the twofold significance first, that it's the name Peter, rock, on this rock I will build my church. It's also the significance of the keys of the kingdom. So through two ways we can see what Jesus intended to do. That he wasn't going to rule as a kingdom by himself. He's like Solomon, the first son of David to be called the Son of God. In 1 Kings 4, he appointed how many royal ministers? 12. But we also discovered that the composition or the structure of the Davidic kingdom as Solomon reigned over it wasn't just to have the king and then 12 royal ministers, but between the king and the royal minister was the prime minister. And Steve highlighted that important passage in Isaiah 22, where you have a corrupt prime minister named Shebna, who's deposed and replaced by a successor named Eliakim. And everybody knows who is now the prime minister under the king, in the line of David, but over the other royal ministers, because he is the one to whom the king entrusts the key of the house of David, so that he shall shut and none shall open, and he shall open and none shall shut. And there you have not only the primacy of Peter as the prime minister in this newly formed Davidic kingdom, but you also have succession. You had a predecessor, Shebna, a successor, Eliakim, and so not surprisingly you also find, as Steve indicated, after Peter you have succession, Linus, Titus, Clement, Cephas, and so on. And this is something that isn't very common to us because we live in democratic or republican forms of government. Now I wanted to just encourage you to go back into Matthew chapter 16, and you might even consider backing up a chapter or two into Matthew 14 and 15, because in Matthew 15 you read about how Jesus, after multiplying the loaves and feeding the 5,000 in the land of Israel, goes up to the district of Tyre and Sidon, which is actually even further north of here, because Caesarea Philippi would have been technically regarded by Jews as being in the land of Israel, Eretz Israel. Whereas the region or the district of Tyre and Sidon where Jesus is in the previous chapter, Matthew 15, is clearly beyond the boundary of Eretz Israel. And that's where the Canaanite woman asks him to heal his daughter, her daughter, and he makes that comparison between the sons who are at the table, representing the Israelites, and the dogs who don't get fed because they're Canaanites. But she says, even the dogs pick up the crumbs. Oh woman, he said, great is your faith, your daughter is healed. The very next episode in the region of Tyre and Sidon is Jesus feeding the 4,000. But notice that the feeding of the 4,000 is not in the land of Israel, but to the north of the land. And when the 4,000 are fed, how do they respond? They glorify the God of Israel, showing us that the 4,000 weren't Israelites. They were glorifying the God of Israel. Israelites would just simply give glory to God. But outsiders, Gentiles, glorify the God of Israel because here is the king of Israel who is now feeding not just Israelites, the sons of the table, but just as that woman, gets to be fed from the crumbs that fall from the bread. There is so much here. I just want to indicate one general conclusion. That is, back in the days of Jesus, there were two competing models, two competing covenants. The Pharisees and the Sadducees disagreed on many things, but they agreed on one thing, that it's going to be the Mosaic covenant that is the model for our government. Whereas Jesus clearly opts for the later covenant, the covenant of David. The covenant with Moses included the 12 tribes, but excluded all of the Gentiles. Whereas the Davidic covenant united the 12 tribes, but it also called the Gentiles to become an integral part of God's covenant family. So the question is, which model are you going to follow? right before Jesus asked the disciples, who do men say that the Son of Man is, he warns them to beware of the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. What is that? They're false teaching that would exclude Gentiles and simply consolidate our empire on the basis of the Mosaic covenant, which always excluded Gentiles. But Jesus, as the Son of David, the King of Israel, as the Christ, is intent upon including Gentiles. He has to first gather the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but even in that setting, he allows Gentiles. This is what we really celebrate here. That what Jesus is restoring is not just the nation of Israel, but the kingdom of David, which is precisely what opens the doors for us. And so as Gentiles, we can come to the land of Israel and discover how this land of covenants had one covenant with Moses that excluded us, and then 4 centuries later, the greatest covenant, the final covenant of the Old Testament period, the covenant not at Sinai with Moses, but the covenant at Zion with David, involving a temple that we as Gentiles are invited to. This temple, of course, is now the church. And this church is now, of course, built upon the rock. And this rock is no longer an inanimate stone, but a living person. And the keys are passed down from one to the next to the next until we have co-pregnant united this royal family. But again, I just wanted to think by thanking you for what you have shared, because you really not only illuminate the text, but you empower us as Catholic Christians to celebrate what Jesus did to us.
Quick logistics. I have 2 bottles.